President Donald Trump has once again complicated Republican leadership plans, demanding Monday that lawmakers in Congress attach voter ID legislation to the spy powers reauthorization bill. Welcome back to the States. The Center Square's Therese Boudreau reporting that U.S. House lawmakers failed to pass even a short-term extension of the Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, known as FISA, before they recessed Friday. Hours before, the president offered a belated olive branch to Democrats. And then days later, in a Truth Social post, Trump announcing that he would be, quote, against FISA if it doesn't come with the Save America Act, full version firmly attached to it. Now, what is the Save America Act? It would mandate that Americans display a valid ID to vote in federal elections. It would require people to present proof of citizenship when registering to vote, and it would necessitate in-person voter registration for federal elections. It also directs all states to remove all non-citizens from their voter rolls. Now, under the legislation pending in Congress, people would not be able to register to vote with only their driver's license, since non-citizens in some states can obtain those. They would instead need to present documents proving U.S. citizenship, such as a birth certificate or a U.S. passport, when they go to register to vote. Now, Democrats argue that the in-person registration and proof of citizenship requirements would unduly burden Americans who are disabled, live in remote areas, or don't have access to the correct documentation. Now, in California, local governments, they're being challenged in the courts for letting non-citizens vote in some elections. In a recent San Francisco County program, County Attorney David Chu was asked about the status of lawsuits challenging laws that do allow non-citizens to vote in some elections.
From 1776 for 150 years till after World War I, immigrants were allowed to vote in most states in our country on the theory that we want to assimilate immigrants in American democratic values and institutions. And it wasn't until an anti-immigrant backlash in World War I that sort of ended. But in recent years, cities across America have allowed this to happen. In fact, at this moment, I believe there are over a dozen cities that have voted to allow non-citizens to vote in a number of contexts. Now, this is particularly important in our schools, just given how challenged our schools are, and given that we know that when we engage more parents in our school system, regardless of their citizenship, it helps to lift up our schools for all parents. And so in 2016, the voters of San Francisco passed a ballot measure that allowed this to happen. Unfortunately, earlier this year, there were conservative organizations that came to San Francisco to bring a lawsuit to try to overturn this. And I should also mention, it is obviously the perspective of our office and our city that this is constitutional. Nothing in the Constitution prohibits non-citizens from voting. And in fact, there's an explicit provision in the Constitution that allows chartered cities like San Francisco, when it comes to school board elections, to be able to dictate the time and manner of those elections.
Now, how that plays out in the courts, observers still have yet to see. But also in California, in the state Senate, Republican State Senator Kelly Sayardo, he had this to say about the state's spending priorities and how it impacts election law.
In the budget, you will find a lot of examples of stuff that we should not be spending money on in place of other things. One of those is $5 million that we're giving to the students of UCLA so they can do a project which is going around the United States suing other governments over their election stuff, over voter integrity or whatever it is. If they want to do that, that's great. Their parents can administer, they can donate money to a fund for that. But in place of that, we have, to my colleague's comment earlier about our senior population, we have a senior center down in Riverside. That is in dire need of upgrading their facility. It's fallen down around them. They can't help all the seniors that they're supposed to be helping. They need $3 million, but instead we're going to spend $5 million to students at UCLA so they can run around suing people in the United States. That's absurd. That is an absurd waste of our money.
Now, it looks a little different in Arizona, as legislators there looking to establish better checks of voter rolls, or at least asking voters to make that decision. Arizona Republican State Representative Rachel Keschel, she laid out what the issue is all about.
So I want to just point out what my colleague in District 16 said, that election integrity is extremely important to constituents on both sides of the aisle. 2/3 of Americans don't trust that our elections are free and fair. That is Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And this bill doesn't do anything to mail-in ballots, which over 80% of Arizonans love. What this bill does is things that we are assured in our Constitution anyway. We should be citizens in order to vote in our elections. We should have valid ID in order to vote in our elections. Our vote is sacred. Each and every one of our votes is sacred. It is how we pick our elected officials that we want to guide us at both state, federal, and local levels. The issue of citizenship and voter ID is something that over 90% of Americans, Arizona is high on the scale, believe that we should have regarding voting.
Now, the point being made there is it's not something to change Arizona law, but simply ask voters their thoughts on voter ID and other election integrity initiatives. But not everybody on board with asking voters that. Arizona Democratic State Representative Stacey Travers, she criticized the measure on the Arizona House floor.
I don't think necessarily the issue is whether anybody wants free and fair and secure and timely elections, because I don't know that there's anybody out there who wouldn't want that. I think the concerns with this legislation, more importantly, are that even after 2.5 years, there's still a lot of concerns that haven't been addressed properly. I can tell you that 10 recorders still oppose it, 13 election directors still oppose it. This is going to cost over $22 million. Some of my concerns are when we talk about early identification. How will a voter be providing ID, quote unquote, before casting an early ballot, which is the dominant way Arizona voters choose to cast a ballot? We have been asking this question many times since the bill was introduced and still have not received an answer.
Now, another election procedure issue states are grappling with is, can states count federal election ballots after Election Day? The U.S. Supreme Court case, Watson versus RNC, that was heard by the U.S. Supreme Court in March, that mail-in ballots counting case still pending. It could come as early as Thursday with a decision. That's the court's next decision day. But the courts move at their own pace, and observers have no way of knowing for sure if that case will be decided before the election in November. We'll keep our eyes out for that with the states.